Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome to this Tableau webinar, Data Visualization Literacy with Andy Kirk. My name is Andy Cotgreave. I'm Technical Evangelist to Tableau, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar today and to welcome Andy. Andy, Mr. Kirk is the man behind visualizingdata.com, the man with the greatest accent in the whole field of data visualization. He's a design consultant, trainer, author, editor of his website, and he does lots of speaking, and he's also a researcher. He's been running the site Visualizing Data since 2010. That's prehistory for a lot of people, but it's one of the most read and respected sources on the internet. Really great blog. And he travels the world training people in visual literacy and data visualization. He's also a lecturer at the Maryland Institute of College of Art in the US. Just this week he's announced he's also going to be a lecturer at the new Master of Science in Business Analytics at the Imperial College Business School here in London. So he's a very busy guy. We're very lucky to have him with us. He's done several webinars with us before, and we're always delighted to have him with us. With that, from Andy Cotgreave, it's over to you, Andy Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Cotgreave, and thank you, Tableau, and thank you everyone who's joined us this afternoon, wherever you are on planet Earth. It's a great pleasure to be here again. Now, the session we've got today is about data visualization literacy, and I've got all sorts of things to talk about here. A lot of the focus in this field is concerned with the matter of creating visualizations. But when you look at the broad issue of what literacy actually means, there's two sides to it. There's reading and there's writing. In visualization terms, there's consuming and there's creating. And there's so much more focus on the creating side, naturally, because it's a very, in many respects, we're in the golden age of discovery and experimentation still. But in some respects, we've abandoned the readers. We've abandoned the focus on what actually goes into making sense of, reading, consuming, whatever term you want to attach to it. How do we make sense of visualizations? And are there factors that we need to be aware of, both as readers and makers, but also are there tactics and strategies that we can employ as readers to get as much out of any visualization that we consume as possible? And there's a couple of key points, which is really why I've put a lot of focus into this side of things for the last year or two, which is there are many more readers than creators. For every person who's creating, there is a big audience potentially out there of people who will never actually get their hands on data. They'll never actually make these things, but will always be consumers. And every creator will also be a consumer, will also be a reader. You cannot make a visualization without going through some degree of exploratory analysis that uses visualization techniques for yourself to read data and to make sense yourself of what you've got in the subject matter that you're working on. So there's a very large population of readers out there that we need to pay attention to. And over the last, since the start of last year, January 2014, I've been very proud to be attached to a project called Seeing Data, and this has been a Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project led by Professor Helen Kennedy, who's now of the University of Sheffield, and with two other colleagues, Rosa Hill from the University of Leeds and Will Allen from the Migration Observatory in Oxford. And we've been a team that's been working on this project for the last kind of 20 months, as I mentioned. And it's been titled, How Do People Engage with Data Visualizations? I'll come on to what that means in a second. But what we've been looking at over these kind of last couple of years is really to get underneath the skin of this issue of visualization literacy from the side of the reader. And two of the primary questions that are most relevant, at least for this talk, there were others, but these are the two things I want to kind of focus on today. What factors in the consumption process, in the reading process, influence whether a visualization will prove effective or otherwise? And what factors in the creation process influence, once again, whether for the readers it will be an effective process? Now, the aims of this project were largely twofold. Of course, there are many other kind of academic benefits as well, but the two main outputs that we were looking to work towards were, firstly, for the general public, for the everyday person, which is a horrible term, but it's the catch-all, to cover everybody in contemporary society who is either struggling with or needs to make sense of visualizations, infographics, charts, anything that's consumed visually. What can we do from this project and through this project to create useful resources for them to better understand what goes into this task and resources to help them improve, importantly? From the other perspective, the professionals in the visualization field, what can we do to help to contribute to their understanding about what they need to think about, what they need to be concerned with to make sure that what they create has the best chance of having an impact with the audience? So they were the core aims. Now, I won't go through all the list that you see there in terms of the methods that we use, but the point of that is to say that we use many different aspects of research methodology to try and tease out some of these key insights, whether it was kind of social semiotics, whether it was interviews, diary keeping. I'll come to this idea of talking maths in a second, focus groups, longer-term diary keeping, interviews. There was a lot of different elements to it that we asked of both professionals and, once again, this horrible term, but everyday people, volunteer participants from all different walks of life, all different kind of corners of society. The talking maths. We deliberately picked a variety of different visualization projects and asked people to experience them, to play with them, to read them, to consume them, to try and make sense of them, and then to kind of articulate their experiences and to articulate and identify what worked and what didn't work and reflect on some of the obstacles that they kind of experienced. These are just snapshots of the 8 projects that we used that covered a variety of different attributes visually. Interactive versus static, kind of small scale versus large scale. A variety of subjects, some of which covered our core concern around migration, and then some which were just everyday matters, sport, pop culture. Some which had mundane colour schemes, some which had kind of vibrant colour schemes. We want to try and tick as many different characteristic boxes as possible to try and expose people to a variety of different visualization cues for which we could then tease into some of the findings. The web address there, by the way, seeingdata.org is the website. I'll mention that in a short while, but the /viz is the collection of visualizations that you see snapshots of there. Now, this idea of talking maths, which was on that list of methods, this was a very useful prop that we asked people to complete as they were going through the experience of playing with and using these variety of visualizations. And what we were essentially asking them to do as they went through this process is to try and come to some very subjective conclusion about whether they liked the project and whether they felt they'd learned something from it, which is a proxy indicator for did they come away with some degree of understanding about that project and about that subject matter. And so this kind of 2x2 matrix, this grid, allowed them to put a little icon of the project they were looking at and establish some sense of assessment. This is just one example that we've scanned in. Basically, people put these little snapshot cutouts of the projects in the position that they felt captured the essence of what they had experienced. And then we used this as a form of kind of visual device for discussion within the focus groups. But it asked people to challenge their assessments. It asked people to say, okay, if you liked something, why? If you disliked something, why? Did you learn from it? What made that possible? Alternatively, what hindered that process of learning? And it was a very useful device from which we've gathered all this material now, which I'm looking to summarise and express in terms of the kind of key findings and reflections in this webinar today. So the two sides of visualization literacy that I think are important to kind of pass on to all you out there, many of whom I would imagine will be people hopefully in the visualization professional sphere, but also people who have got a keen interest but may not be creators, but we're all readers. That's the key thing. So we'll be looking at some of the kind of socio-cultural factors that really affect positively and negatively the engagement of readers, but also how these findings and reflections can be applied and made relevant to creators. And I think it's important to kind of preempt this discussion by saying very little of this is rocket science. Very little of this is revolutionary discoveries. A lot of it is what we've probably instinctively believed in the past. But hopefully what it gives us is much more kind of substantiated evidence of those things that we've assumed and made them a little bit more concrete. But these are indeed factors that play a role. Before I go into these findings, I just need to clarify one thing and establish kind of commonality of language. How do people engage with data visualizations? What do we mean by engage? Well, of course, there are many different ways of defining visualization. The one that I use is that visualization is about facilitating understanding. That should be the objective of any visualization, to enable some degree of understanding to be imparted from you as a creator to your readers. Whether that's a small grain of discovery or a huge Hollywood moment of wow. It's all part of the kind of degrees of flavours of understanding. And so when we're talking about this project in terms of how do we assess what factors kind of help engagement, it's about not just attracting people, it's about kind of taking them through the process of understanding and then leaving with something that is a kind of identifiable form of understanding. And this idea of what is understanding has been something that I've been really concerned with in writing this new book that I'm working on. And what I've arrived at is this sense that there are three stages to our process as readers of arriving at some outcome of understanding. The first stage is the act of reading. We read a chart. We look at what it shows us. We establish what the various marks and attributes mean in terms of their association. What do these colours mean? What does the size of a value represent? We establish a recognition of where the big values are, the small values, the medium values, where the up and down has taken place. We form comparisons about how do these things rank? Is that bigger than that? Is that joined to that? So it's a very kind of almost cold process of looking and establishing some sense of big, small, medium, up or down, just the general reading of the content of a visualization. From there, we arrive at some process of interpretation, which is what do these big, small, medium things mean? Is it good to be big? Is it bad to be big? What is the most meaningful kind of takeaways? What's the kind of exceptions? What's the unusual? What are the outliers? What are the trends that we can take away? So it's going more deeper into what do these values mean? The final stage is comprehending, which is almost a reflective sense of, okay, I've read this chart, I've established what good and bad means, but what does it mean to me? What do I take away from this? What does this do to my pre-existing understanding about the subject? What does this mean in terms of perhaps my actions? What do I need to do next with this knowledge that I've acquired? And I think this idea of kind of breaking down the process of understanding is very helpful, especially for designers and creators, in understanding things that we can influence. Because there are many things in this kind of three-stage process that we can influence, and many things that we can't. And that's kind of the essence of what I want to talk about as we go through the different factors that we've kind of unearthed. Now, not surprisingly, the first of these key kind of socio-economic factors is the issue of subject matter and the relevance of a subject matter to us as the reader. I love this quote from Zach Gemignani. Data visualization is like family photos. If you don't know the people in the picture, the beauty of the composition won't keep your attention. There are many of us who work in offices who have probably been exposed to photographs of colleagues' children, and frankly, some of you might not care. You've got no relevance. They've got no relevance or relationship to you. So no matter how cute the picture is, it doesn't have any impact on you because it's not any part of your life. We've all got biases, interests, indifferences. Things are relevant to us, things are irrelevant to us, and that has such a huge bearing in visualization terms on whether we will just fundamentally be interested enough to read a subject portrayed visually. This is a wonderful project. This is an interactive by Louis Carley, I think it is. And this is about the dimension changes of wood across different cities and across different times of the year. For those people who have got an interest in the subject, it's probably the best thing they've ever seen about that subject. It's a beautifully elegant, exploratory visualization. But for many other people out there, it's probably quite an indifferent experience because why do we need to learn about the dimension changes in wood? It probably has very little relevance to many of us out there, even though it's a very, very good, technically, visualization project. And we found in the process of doing this research that the engagement with or not with a subject matter was such a huge kind of junction in the road that took people towards enjoying the process, being interested, and then going the other way. These are just some of the quotes from the focus groups that we had about a couple of these projects. The BBC graphic, which was looking at how your dimensions, your height and your weight matches different Olympic athletes. I won't read out the full quote there, but one of the people responding to this experience was, well, why bother? What's it got to do with me? I'm not interested in this kind of analysis about how my body compares to athletes. The graphic they see in the bottom right there was a graphic from the Metro about the kind of social media figures for Beyonce and I can't remember the other lady's name now. It's gone. I won't even try and find it. But the response was, I didn't like what the topic was about. What is the point? What's the relevance to me? And that was an initial obstacle that just... Shakira, by the way. Sorry, I just remembered. That was an initial obstacle that really kind of ruined that person's experience beyond that point. They just weren't interested. And as we go through this process of reading, interpretation, and comprehending, your subject knowledge has a great impact on how much you can draw interpretations and how much you can draw your own comprehension at the end. This bar chart shows the games and the goals for Lionel Messi over his career at FC Barcelona. Now, it's very easy for pretty much all of us to understand how to read a bar chart. The bigger the bar, the higher the value. And it's quite easy for us to understand that the blue columns are for the games and the purple column is for the goals. So it's very easy for all of us to read where the big and the small is, where the bigger than and the smaller than exists. But in terms of interpretation, if you don't know about football or soccer, if there are any non-Europeans out there, you don't really know what this means. Now, I know a lot about football. It's probably my main kind of hobby and passion. I know the significance of the amazing achievement that Lionel Messi has had throughout his career. I know that the idea that he's scored more goals than the games he's played is absolutely ridiculous. That peak around 2011-12 is an incredible achievement that's almost been unmatched by any other player throughout history. And so I can not only read the chart, I can draw the interpretations of what the values mean in terms of good, bad, impressive, not impressive. I can kind of create the overall comprehension about the impression and the impact this has on me as a football fan, about the amazing achievements of this guy throughout his career. Using the exact same values to change the subject matter now, if this analysis was about the National Hockey League in the US and Canada, I wouldn't know how to draw the interpretations. I don't know enough about sport. If we had the same figures for the games and the points amassed by Patrick Kane of the Chicago Blackhawks, I wouldn't know really what would be expected of a hockey player in terms of the points per games amassed. So I can read it I can read the big and the small and the bigger that. I don't really know what it means. And so when we're talking about judging our audience, understanding what they will know about a subject will be absolutely of paramount importance, because you might need to give them some more assistance. You might need to tell your audience why these values are relevant, important, and impressive. And so looking at these three stages and their relevance to the issue of subject matter, am I interested? That will be a key junction before you even almost start reading the process, the project. Can I form meaning? Do I know enough about this subject to be able to interpret it and what it means? And beyond that, what does it mean to me? Do I have enough kind of contextual understanding to understand how this fits into my overall knowledge of this subject and of this topic presented? So my advice for those of you who are readers, first of all, judge the subject matter. Is it of interest to you and of relevance to you? Do you have sufficient knowledge to work your way through those three steps? And read through the topic, read through the introductions, get a sense of what specifically it's about. Far too often, people dive into the chart before they've really associated and acquainted themselves with the subject matter and the specific topic being displayed. For creators, define and serve your target audience. And this idea of design for your audience is easily trotted out every time when someone talks about the best practices in visualization. It's very easily said, but not always easily done. But you're asking these kind of questions. What does my target audience know and not know? Will they be interested in the subject, or do they need some degree of almost persuasion and seduction to explain why this should be of relevance and interest to them? Should you care if many people won't be interested? Maybe you've got a niche subject that can't reach all quarters of the potential audience that's out there. Maybe it is a niche thing that will have a very specific and defined and potentially small audience, and that will be fine. The second main factor that we arrived at was around kind of trust and prejudice. I've actually combined two of our main factors here, because I kind of think they're almost part and parcel of the same discussion for this audience today. Do you trust who made it, and do you trust where it is and where it lives and where it's been published? The graphic, or the pair of graphics that you see there, are about the same analysis, the same data values. And this is about kind of home ownership in the UK, looking at the kind of falling numbers of home owners across the different decades by different generations. The original graphic on the left was made by the ONS, the Office for National Statistics. The graphic on the right was published in the Daily Mail. It's the same data, it's the same values, but because the left graphic came from the ONS, there's a certain integrity attached to that. The inclusion of the source material, where the data came from, the inclusion of the ability to download the data that sits beneath it, the extra annotation at the top of the chart, just gives that impression that there's more to trust with this work. Not only the absence of all those different features on the right graphic, but the kind of, shall we say, the kind of trashier style, to me at least, undermines a certain integrity of that graphic. The fact it's in the Daily Mail, once again, perhaps with my own prejudice in place, once again takes away the potential integrity that I attach to that display of data. And this issue of trust is often beyond our control. Some of you in the field may be familiar with this graphic from Reuters that was published last year and created a huge storm of debate and discussion and criticism, frankly, about this idea that this was a very deceptive and kind of scandalous graphic. It's about gun deaths. And when it's about gun deaths, you may probably decide not to take too many risks with how you portray that data. In this case, there was an attempt to try and create the metaphor of dribbling blood, influenced by another famous graphic from the South China Morning Post about the Iraq conflict. It didn't work. People saw the negative, the idea of the yellow mountain being the kind of shape of the area chart, when in fact it's the red on a negative inverse axis. But this created such a storm of lack of trust, lack of faith, even though it came from Reuters, for which I would imagine many of you out there would attach a certain amount of trust and faith in kind of integrity and neutrality of what they're reporting upon. Just those devices used to portray this data just undermined completely the trust that was attached to it. Trust is hard to secure, but it's very easy to lose. One of the comments that struck me about the research work that we, in relation to this graphic from Scientific American, looking at freshwater consumption. Once again, I won't read out the full graphic, but the reader in this case felt that the indicator, the metric of data shown, wasn't appropriate. It needed to be standardized to show the kind of freshwater consumption per capita. And so that immediately kind of snowballed into this idea that the visualization was flawed, and that kind of dramatic statement at the end, it was anti-science. So trust is a big, big issue. The baggage that we bring in terms of opinions and beliefs and prejudices, as I mentioned, my own views there about how I might perceive a project published in the Daily Mail. Changing people's ideas, persuasion in general, is clearly and is known to be a very difficult thing. In one of the projects that we had that was looking at the migration patterns across the UK, what was very interesting, one of the comments was the reader was of the belief that asylum-seeking numbers were on the rise. The data that was being shown to him or her showed the opposite. Showed that actually either I think it was in their area perhaps, it was actually in decline. It's very hard to change people's beliefs. If you see a figure that does not match what you expect, it is very hard to establish that trust because people are so entrenched in their views in many respects. And certainly when it comes to certain subject matters, such as matters around immigration and migration. So in terms of trust and prejudice, going through these three stages, the first question is, can I read this? Am I given an accurate portrayal that allows me to read with conviction, with accuracy, the chart that's presented in front of me? Are there any distortions, 3D, truncated axes? Are the colours confusing? Am I fundamentally impeded from reading this through flawed, untrustworthy design? Are the insights that I arrive at accurate because of any potential manipulations of the calculations, or any assumptions that might kind of change the accuracy of the insights that emerge? And therefore, based on that foundation of lack of trust potentially, can I use this? Can I use these outcomes in my own building of knowledge? So once again, the advice readers here, always look at who made it and where it's published, and draw your conclusions from that about the integrity and the authority of that voice. Is it something that really you can immediately trust and understand the kind of quality of the work? Is it something that's maybe a little bit more suspicious? How did they make it? We should expect of designers some degree of explanation about where data's come from, the source data, what was done to it, what calculations were applied or assumptions made. But I think it's important as well for readers to have a little bit more trust in general that 99.9% of makers of visualizations mean well. They don't aim to mislead or deceive. The availability or lack of data, contextual restrictions, time pressures, the limited representation options that might exist, the influence of people in the middle, kind of clients, managers, all these things can have an impact on the final solution that may or may not take it towards some degree of almost undermined trust in the eye of the reader, but that is not something that was necessarily intended. It's just a consequence of all these restrictions that take place. For creators, always be transparent. Tell people what you've done and why. Explain what it shows and doesn't show. But be realistic. Sometimes you've got topics that are just inherently difficult to achieve trust and belief that you're presenting genuine, quality, accurate analysis. But don't mislead. Don't use all these classic deception such as 3D, truncation of axes, miscalculation of geometries, all these kind of things. These are things that we've got control that we can do to enhance as much as possible the trust as it's perceived by the readers. Confidence and skills. This is really about our own ability to simply read graphics and our own ability to have that kind of statistical, mathematical understanding about how to make sense of numbers. Our own ability to have the necessary computer skills. It might be assumed these days that for interactives, are people sufficiently skilled to interrogate and to manipulate the view? Language skills. A lot of projects have text. If your work has to reach a global audience, will people be fundamentally able to read the language used? So there's a lot of different skills that build up the kind of foundation of a good, astute reader. Some charts are simply unfamiliar to many people. We're all very confident, I'm sure, with the bar chart, the line chart, the pie chart, and several others. But there are so many chart types out there being used. Methods like the connected scatter plot that you see here from Bloomberg would be very difficult for many people to make sense of. But the key thing here is that how to read this graphic pop-up. That it guides people through the process of understanding what a line going right means, a line going down means, etc., etc. You're kind of coaching people live in the graphic itself. And everything's new once. The first bar chart would have been witchcraft to the first audiences. Nowadays, it's absolutely second nature to the vast majority of people. Chart types that we've seen floating around the field over the last few years are new techniques. And so once again, that audience, there may be some suspicion about how effective that might be. But everything is new once. And so we need to appreciate that some things in life need learning. And we might need to put a bit of effort into understanding how to read something. I draw the contrast in my book at the moment about remembering the early days of video games on devices like the Commodore 64, Billy Thompson's Decathlon, and you have this very simple interaction. You just waggle that stick as hard and as quickly as possible to make him, I think it was the hurdles and the sprint, to make him go as fast as possible. You learn two things, move left, move right. These days for Xbox and PS3 games, there are so many different controls and so many control combinations, and yet kids under the age of 10 can very quickly build up incredible skills with these kind of interactions. So we are capable of doing this. The keyboard looks on the surface a very complex thing. How on earth can we type with this thing? Why is it not in alphabetical order? But we've learned, we've adapted, we've practiced, and it's now not even something we would even mention on things like CVs. 20 years ago, we might have claimed to be good typists. We wouldn't do that now, because it's just second nature. Learn how to read can be very rewarding. One of the things I've been fascinated with over the last year is the subject of dendrochronology, how you read tree rings and what the meaning of a narrow tree ring means and a wide tree ring. And those moments when you can see the impact of forest fires or insect attack. We can learn so much by strategically and tactically learning how to read. And as you can see from the comments on this piece that we've already seen, the first person couldn't quite get through that barrier of trying to work out how all these lines joined and what that meant in terms of quantities and relationships. The person on the right kind of got through that barrier. They persevered. And once they'd kind of had that utopian moment of discovery, they were able to see, read, and then begin that process of interpretation and comprehension. Some things need us to put a bit of effort in to get to the other side. But even with help, some people can be confused, and what was interesting about this comment was the suggestion they were making was actually already on the project, but perhaps they misunderstood. Perhaps it wasn't sufficiently well explained. So when it comes to all these kind of annotations around legends and guides, we need to make sure that as many people as possible have as much help as possible to give them every chance of reading, interpreting, and comprehending. So fundamentally, when it comes to how confidence and skills impacts on this process of understanding, it really kind of exists in that first stage, If you can get people through that initial barrier of how to read a graphic, they will be unlocked in that journey through interpreting and comprehending. But this is the key junction to get people through the process. Advice for readers, greater maturity. Just because you don't immediately understand a chart doesn't mean to say it's wrong. It might reflect more your own deficit in visualization literacy. So persevere, look for guides, seek assistance. Once again, we are very quick to jump into reading charts, but without taking the care to read the guides, to read the instructions, to look at the legends in detail. So be prepared to learn, and you'll get the benefits from the other side. And also stand up for your own convictions. The kind of sophistication of our opinions is important. Don't hate the pie chart because so-and-so said so. Hate the pie chart because it's a bad pie chart, not because it's a pie chart in and of itself. For creators, it's all about the assistance that we give. Make sure that any potential reader has all the assistance, all the mental equipment they need to be able to fully understand how to read that chart, and potentially also what are the key insights in terms of interpretation and what it should mean to them. And don't be unnecessarily self-restricted. There are a lot of organisations out there, a lot of newspaper and media organisations out there who, until recently, would never have entertained the idea of using a scatter plot in a newspaper, for example, because they don't think people have got the capacity or the patience or the tolerance to learn how to read a scatter plot display. Respect the audience. People have got the capacity to learn. Give them all the help they need. It might be the right chart to use, so just use it. It's the best way to express that data visually. Time and pressure. The impact of the constraints as readers in terms of how immediate do we need the insights? How immediate do we need to be able to read something and make sense of it? When I'm training people, I generally use kind of 4 characteristic settings in which people will be typically consuming work. The boardroom, the quick environment, give me some quick insights in 5 or 10 seconds. I need to kind of push on. The coffee shop on a Sunday, you've got much more time and patience and tolerance. The pressures are reduced. You can pore over a detailed, potentially complex display of data. The dashboard, the kind of visualization as an instrument, monitoring, covering all different aspects. It might look overwhelming, but actually you need all of those different devices to truly manage the operations on which the subject covers. Sometimes we present visualizations. We actually add that level of literacy in person, commenting, narrating, pointing out the key shapes, especially as Hans Rosling famously did in his TED Talk. Some projects are just inherently deep. They will take time. Some of the comments about the Better Life Index in the research almost expressed the sense that there was so much depth to it, so many different ways you could interrogate, manipulate, personalize, dive into, drill down into the data. It was almost overwhelming. Too much information to take in quickly was one of the comments. So in the right setting, the depth and the breadth would be perfect. In different settings, it might not be. You might need something that's much more summary in nature. And there's a very important aspect in all this about the distinction between simplicity and clarity. Visualization projects universally don't need to be simple. Context is what drives whether something needs to be simple or otherwise. Clarity is key. Some projects are complicated. They will take time. But as long as they are clear and as accessible as they can be, without reducing the complicated content and almost oversimplifying the content, that's absolutely fine, so long as it suits the setting. Some projects need to preserve complexity to make the point that this is a complex ecosystem. In this example in the New York Times, the financial crisis is not something that's simple. And so this kind of conveys the complexity of who owes what to whom. In other occasions, simplicity is absolutely fundamentally important. Once again, Hans Rosling, that's 2 ticks in the box for Hans Rosling on this project, on this presentation. try to simplify in this kind of presentation that he gave, simplifying the idea of the number of people in poverty around the world. It's a nice, simplified, reduced display of a very otherwise complex and complicated system of content. Some projects often exhibit creep, feature creep, content creep. They try and pack in too much because they almost lack the courage to stick to some degree of focus, to not do something. The discipline to not do something is as important as the discipline to do something. So once again, going through these three stages, time and pressure impacts on all three elements. Have we got enough time to consume, enough time to extract, enough time to make sense of what this means to me? So you need to make sure as designers that you create the right level, the right package of information for the setting and the audience. As readers, the first thing we need to face is, what is the task proposition? How big is it? How many different parts has it got? How many charts? How much text? How much work is ahead for me to make my way through this project? Clarity versus simplicity. Don't always expect to see something that's simple or immediate, because some subject matters are just inherently complex, and if you reduce them or dilute them, they'll lose that essence of kind of content that has been intended. For creators, it's got to be fit for purpose, self-explanatory. But this idea of courage and conviction to not do something, I think, is very, very important. We don't have to include every permutation of analysis or interactivity. Commit to some degree of focus. The fifth out of 6 key factors is emotions. And this is important because really emotions covers every aspect of this talk, really. When you have people involved in the system, perfect goes out the window. There is no universality, there's no commonality of opinion, because we're all different, we're all unique, we're not robots. On the talking maps, the spread of views about how people liked, disliked, learned and didn't learn from this BBC project just shows the variety of opinions that are out there, the variety of experiences that people had. We're all unique. We've all got different tastes and beliefs and moods. We like things and we don't like things. For those of us as visualization and infographic professionals, there's this kind of confusion about how and why so many of these infographics out in the field on social media are as successful as they appear to be. They might not tick all our purist boxes, but there is an audience for these kind of quick, light bite, fun, colourful displays. They might contain flaws and errors and visual flaws, but people are different. People like things like that, and we can't really go against that. So emotions influence every aspect of that process of understanding. I felt shocked, but at the same time I found it fun to explore this project about migration in the UK. Fun is a really important attribute. This project from the Guardian US in the build to the last US elections showed the swing states, and you can drag those balloons left or right, depending on who you believe might win that particular state election. It's a fun project. It's nice to play with. The physics and the dynamics of dragging the balloons and popping them and resetting them is just fundamentally fun. And you can't underestimate the impact of people being appealed through fun and pleasure. And respecting the subject matter, we talked before about that gun project, looking at the Florida gun crimes. Subject matters that have inherent emotive qualities. Sometimes you want to exploit those, sometimes you want to avoid those. Sometimes you can't control the emotive responses that people will have. The BBC Olympic project had this reaction from one of our participants. The attentiveness it felt in their mind about body image and the contrasts that it made about the kind of sport it recommended that their body type would be most suitable for. One of the interesting things that we found from the project was, despite some people expressing a lack of like or a dislike for a project, they still managed to get through the process of understanding. They still found something from that project that added an extra grain or otherwise of knowledge. And I think that's an important thing. We don't always need to visually be appealed by a work. So long as we've got a need and an interest in the subject, we can almost push through that kind of visual obstacle that dislike might create in our mind. So the emotions really kind of bookend this process. Am I seduced? Am I appealed? Am I sufficiently attracted to this work at the start? And at the end, what does it drive me in terms of the emotions that I come away with from this project? What actions, what kind of behaviour changes am I motivated to undertake? The emotions actually really apply more, the advice around emotions really applies more for creators and readers at this stage. You can't please everyone. Don't expect to, or even aim to, get 100% of people on board. It's just fundamentally impossible. We're all unique, and that influence has a great deal of impact in terms of those people that will or will not engage with the project. But what was very interesting was that the very basic visual cues of things like colour and typeface and the size of a font had a great impact in frustrating people or attracting people. Very simple things that we can do better more often. Lastly, this is one that I've kind of arrived at myself, actually. It didn't necessarily emerge from the findings, but I've added this to the slide deck today because I think it's important. Our own, as readers, our own curiosities, the things that we want and need from a project cannot always be served. The frustration that people expressed when the analysis that they were interested in was not presented, or the level of the summary was not presented. Good if you wanted to find something specific out, bad if you wanted a general picture. Maybe the project, the ebb and flow graphic there about the evolving nature of the box office industry, the movie industry in the US. The data went back to 1986. One person was frustrated or intrigued by what would have the patterns shown had it been shown before 1986. The data might not have been available, but the frustration that someone felt was expressed there. People really often expressed an idea of what they would like to have seen, that it didn't quite serve what they were interested in. I would have. And this is important because we can't serve all the different potential permutation of curiosities that exist. A chart can also only do so much. It can't always tell us why. Charts often tell us where interesting things exist, but not necessarily the cause. They show the effects, but not necessarily the cause. And sometimes people want to know the cause. They want to be given all the answers. But fundamentally, we can't always do that. So this idea of the curiosities, the wants and needs of people is something that really manifests itself in that first stage. Is it showing me what I want? And once again, that will have a great impact on whether people continue through that process of understanding towards the end. For readers, explore titles, subheadings, look for different charts on offer. What does it show and not show? Acquaint yourself with the different options that you've got to interrogate and manipulate if it isn't interactive. Give yourself a real understanding at the start about what you can do with this project and, importantly, not do. And what would be reasonable? Be more mature about your frustrations. Could it have even been feasible to do the thing that you're interested in? Or is there a good reason why it wouldn't have been possible or even been included? Lastly, for creators, you can't please everyone again. Even with a very small, simple data set, there are so many different angles, so many different possible narratives that you can pick to follow and ignore. You will not be able to reach everyone's requirements around curiosities. And I think this is really at the heart of the art of data visualization. And it's not easy. You need judgment, empathy, and a certain sense of just now. So you need to just have that savviness about what is the right way to attack this analysis. So that's just a summary across these 6 main factors that we've arrived at, largely from the findings, although the kind of last one was something I've kind of added myself, that really affect this process, this kind of 3-stage process of arriving at and going through understanding. There is loads more information about this project on the seeingdata.org website a number of different resources, and I would kind of urge you to take a look at that and see what you find. We're going through a number of kind of different engagements at the moment, different presentations and talks and articles, and the kind of repertoire of outputs we'll build on this site over the coming months or so. And I'll just leave with another link that I would recommend you taking an interest in. An article from 2003, Learning to See by Oliver Reichenstein. And this was a really impactful article that I read that really kind of changed my views about the importance of seeing, the importance of having an approach, a strategy to read and to see things. And in one of the lines in this, chefs are able to more clearly discern what they taste because through constant exposure, they've developed improved senses as well as the vocabulary to express and discuss their impressions. To be a good maker, you need to be a good reader. And I think that's a really important takeaway that I would kind of express as a summary of this talk. So thanks very much once again for hosting me, and thank you very much for watching, listening, and thinking about this subject. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. This is Andy Cockgreave again. On behalf of everybody, that was a really, really interesting and informative presentation. So we have time for questions and answers. People, please stay on the webinar, and you can use the Q&A box to type in the questions, and we will crack on. Before we do that, Andy, thanks for the Daley Thompson's image. I certainly waggled my stick in the 80s to that at great length. But also, more importantly, as many people pointed out, it was Rihanna and Shakira, not Beyonce.
Oh.
So your street, yeah,
I'm okay with that. Street, I'm really okay with that.
I wonder whether the audience was. I'm not sure, but but moving on to more serious things, we'll get some questions coming in. Certainly, one thing I wanted to ask. You gave great advice for creators and readers. What about advice you'd give to people who want to critique data viz based on the contextual stuff you've talked about for the two types you've already talked about?
Yeah, in a sense, it kind of bridges the two, really, because I guess the best critics are the ones who also have the empathy and sympathy for the people who make. But you've also, when you're critiquing something, you tend to come from the position of a reader, of a consumer. So on the surface, you can make the criticisms about has it worked for you? Does it lend itself to being able to be read? Are you, as the supposed audience, given enough help to work through those stages of interpretation and comprehension? But obviously, from the design critique point of view, generally speaking, some of the points that I've made there about advice to designers are the things that kind of most kind of commonly resonate, really, because I think criticism in this field is something that we still need to kind of work towards more constructiveness about. I think there's a lot of knee-jerk criticisms that and sometimes valid, but other times a little bit less sympathetic. And I think going back to that Florida gun crimes project, the sea of negativity that swarmed around that project was quite incredible. And not just visualization people, but politicians and celebrities. And I thought a lot of it was really kind of unfair and unfounded because it was, maybe to me and me only, but it was clear what the intent was. It wasn't executed effectively, but the intent, to me at least, was clear. And I think we need to have a breather. We need to take a step back and think, is this person intending to deceive, or is it just something they've tried that hasn't quite worked? So, I mean, I've kind of gone around the houses there in terms of an answer, but I do think some of the points that I've listed there for both readers and designers coming together gives you the all-round perspective of whether something has been an effective thing to kind of critique or not.
Yeah, brilliant. I think with that gun deaths one, didn't the author, it was a woman who authored it, and she was like, I was just trying my best. Why have I?
Yeah.
Then she came out, she's like, I didn't mean to make this, so she ended up in a real...
she was absolutely cool as a cucumber about it. Christine Schaff, who works for Reuters, she sits next to Simon Scar, who made the Iraq conflict one. She was trying to emulate that approach.
Right. Yeah, amazing.
So it was about, trying to emulate something that she'd been impressed by. It didn't quite work. It wasn't quite the right resolution of data to pull it off, but it was not intended to deceive. It was about trying to try something different. But the point I made there was maybe with a gun-related subject matter, stick to the safe area.
Yeah, okay. All right, Sandra says that not knowing that your pop stars actually boosted your credibility, so that's good. Anyway, James Lytle asks, can you talk more about what you found from viewers' ability to learn and analyze data versus the motivation to do it, and presumably to do the analysis? Is there a tipping point?
It's a really good question. I was expecting a question from James, actually, so thank you for pulling out that one. It's something that I probably will look to answer offline because it's not a single and simple answer. Obviously the point to make about the research methods is, the artificiality of a focus group is that you're asking people very deliberately to sit in front of a computer, follow instructions, and try and find a way to experience these projects in as neutral and as natural a way as possible. Inevitably, it's not how they would normally consume these things. Most of the projects we ask them to look at, they would probably never even be interested to look at in the first place. So, in a sense, the answer I don't think I can give as a result of the findings from the work. I think instinctively there's a few things I could cover, but I'm mindful of the time, so I think I'll pick up that one with James separately. But I will share with the audience wider. But yeah, it's a multifaceted answer that I don't think I've got all the articulation right now.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, Martin Cassidy asks, is it best to just have a go at data visualization and learn as you go along than to continue to use old ways of presenting data, which we know have limited impact? Well, that's it's a very loaded question. He says the NHS data reports are overly long.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain... Well, the immediate answer is yes. Always try new techniques, not for any kind of superficiality of wanting to do something different for the sake of it, but because it adds value. It sheds new light on data. It's a new way to connect to an audience. Things like the realms of public sector outputs and the NHS, for example. There's a certain, I don't know if it's the right term, but there's a certain Stockholm syndrome of a lot of people, I think, that even if something is potentially flawed or if something is potentially ugly and a little bit hard to read, they're so familiar with it. They've had it every month for the last X number of years that change is scary. And change is scary, and visualization development is fundamentally a change management process. And that's something I'm always very sensitive about when I'm working with clients, is that if we move a couple of steps forward from bar charts to something that's a bit more attractive, but for good reasons and for, with real merit, you need to very carefully take your audience through that process of acquainting themselves with what this new thing is. Yeah. Because whilst you have a number of people who are jumping on board immediately, there's a lot of people who have that sense of fear and reluctance. So I think that's an important kind of note there.
All right, and just quickly, how would you, if people are going to experiment and do change, how would you measure the success or failure of those experiments?
Well, that's the golden question, because that was also another one of our research questions, which was, can you and how do you measure effectiveness? And really, we didn't quite come to a major conclusion. In fact, what we found was that there was all these different attributes that we've gone through, the factors that influence whether something can be effective or not. But in a sense, what we've found is that there is more work to do there. And I think that's one of the, if we get a chance again to continue researching, that'll be one thing that we probably look to focus on next, because I think it's the $64,000 question in this field, really.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Right. Well, there's plenty of questions, but we are out of time. I will ask you one last question from Barend Botha. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Andy Kirk, when will your new book be published?
Oh, well, thank you very much for asking that question. It is lined up for May of next year, but I need to finish it first. And I've got 3.5 more weeks to find somewhere to get through to the end. But yeah, it'll be due out next May. But if you visit my website, I'll be keeping people kind of on top of the schedule. But thank you for that question.
Yeah, great question. Okay, well, we are out of time. So everybody, all our participants, thank you very much for attending today. Really interesting topic. Great content from Andy. Please join us again. Go check out Andy's website, and you can find out more about Tableau at tablowsoftware.com/trial. And with that, we'd like to thank you for attending. We will send out a link to the recording. I hope everybody else enjoys the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.